My name is Eleanor, but most people call me Ellie. I'm 35 years old, and just a few weeks ago, I lost my entire life in a divorce. The mansion, my children, everything I knew. Julian's lawyer wore a smug smile as the judge signed the final papers, awarding my ex-husband full custody simply because I had no independent financial means. I just sat there in the courtroom wearing my one good suit and watched as my world disintegrated. Where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments, and please hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt utterly powerless. You'll want to hear what happened next. A full decade. I poured 10 years of my life into that man and his ambitions. I managed our sprawling home. I raised our 2 children. I organized every single one of his business functions, and I foolishly convinced myself we were a team, building a future together. I was so naive it hurts to think about. The prenuptial agreement I'd so carelessly signed at 25 had returned to haunt me like a ghost. Mrs. Croft, Judge Albright's voice sliced through my days. Given your lack of recent employment and current financial state, the court believes it is in the children's best interest to remain with their father. Chloe's face appeared in my mind. My 9-year-old daughter, who still needed me to brush out the tangles in her hair each morning. And Leo, my 7-year-old son, who would creep into my bed after a nightmare, knowing only I could make him feel safe. Your Honor? I tried to protest, but my own attorney put a hand on my arm, a silent signal to give up. The ruling was absolute. Julian had successfully painted me as a frivolous, unemployable socialite who did nothing but spend his money. It didn't matter that I had an economics degree with honors. It didn't matter that I had given up a promising career to foster his. Leaving that courthouse felt like walking away from my own grave. The woman I had been for the last 10 years was buried in that room. The other wives in our affluent circle would start whispering about me. Poor Eleanor, they'd say. She really should have been smarter about it. But none of them would dare offer a hand. That's just not how their world worked. By the time I made it to the parking garage, Julian was already securing the children in his sleek black Mercedes. Chloe's face was pressed against the glass, her cheeks streaked with tears. Leo wouldn't even look at me. At 7, he probably couldn't grasp why Mommy wasn't coming home with them. I mouthed, "I love you" to Chloe through the window, but Julian sped away before she could even react. Standing there all alone, clutching the keys to my old Subaru, the one thing Julian couldn't claim because it was in my name before the marriage, I knew I had only one place left to go. The old coastal farmhouse my mother had left me when she passed away 4 years ago. I'd never even stayed there overnight. It was meant to be a weekend renovation project, but Julian always had an excuse not to visit the rundown shack in the middle of nowhere. The drive was a 2-hour journey along winding coastal back roads I barely recognized. When I finally turned onto the overgrown driveway, my spirits sank even lower. The farmhouse looked even more dilapidated than I remembered. The paint was peeling in long strips, shutters hung at odd angles, and weeds had pushed their way through the floorboards of the porch. This wreck was supposed to be my new beginning, but it was mine. Julian's name wasn't on the deed. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I owned something he had no claim to. I pulled my single suitcase from the back of the car. It was pathetic how little I'd managed to take from my old life, and walked to the front door. The key, thankfully, still turned in the lock. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and forgotten memories. My mother's furniture was draped in white sheets like pale ghosts of a happier time. The power flickered on, and the tap water ran a rusty brown for a few minutes before turning clear. I stood in my mother's kitchen, completely overwhelmed. How was I supposed to start over at 35 with nothing but a crumbling house and $950 in my bank account? That night I cried until I fell asleep on the old living room sofa, wrapped in a quilt Mom had stitched by hand before I was even born. But when the sun rose, something inside me had changed. Maybe it was the profound quiet. No Julian criticizing how I made my coffee. No children bickering over a toy. No demanding schedule to follow. For the first time in a decade, my thoughts were my own. I had two paths. I could either be crushed by the weight of my loss, or I could start building something from the wreckage. As I watched the sunrise filter through Mom's old lace curtains, I chose to build. I just didn't know that my mother had already laid the foundation for me. The next morning, I woke up with something resembling a plan. First, I had to make this house functional. Second, I had to find a job. And third, I had to convince that Judge I could provide a stable home for Chloe and Leo. Seemed simple enough, but I'd never had to rebuild my life from the ground up. I started with the essentials. The ancient furnace coughed back to life after some stern words and a few strategic taps with a hammer. The kitchen faucet had a persistent drip, but a few YouTube tutorials on basic plumbing gave me enough confidence to fix it. I armed myself with cleaning supplies from the local dollar store and declared war on years of dust and neglect. 3 days into my new existence as a handywoman, a woman appeared at my back door. It was Mrs. Gable from the farm next door. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, offering a casserole dish that smelled like divine intervention. "Your mother always did love my chicken pot pie." We sat at Mom's small kitchen table, and I had to stop myself from inhaling the entire dish in one go. "She was so proud of you, you know," Mrs. Gable said softly. "Always went on about your college degree, how you had such a mind for numbers and business. Said you got that from her side of the family." "I haven't used that degree in over 10 years, I admitted, swirling my fork in the pie to avoid making eye contact. Julian thought I was more useful at home. Mrs. Gable's kindly expression hardened. "Your mother never trusted that man. Said he was the type who'd take credit for the sunrise if he could." The raw accuracy of her words hit me with the force of a punch. How had my mother seen it so clearly so many years ago, when I had been so blind? After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. My economics degree. I'd graduated at the top of my class, secured a position at a prestigious financial firm, and had a clear career path before Julian convinced me I had to choose. "The children need a full-time mother," he'd argued. "We can easily afford for you to stay home." What he really meant was that he needed a personal assistant who worked for free. That afternoon, I drove into town to see about job prospects. The outcome was as depressing as I'd expected. Most places wanted recent experience, which I didn't have. The few entry-level jobs available paid barely enough to cover the cost of gas, let alone prove financial stability to a judge. "You could try the bank," suggested Brenda at the town's tiny employment office. "They're looking for someone part-time, but the pay isn't great." Not great pay was still better than no pay at all. I walked the 2 blocks to Crestwood Valley Bank. The manager, a woman around my age named Diane Miller, looked at my hastily printed resume with a skeptical eye as I explained my situation. 10 years is a long time to be out of the workforce," she said flatly. "And frankly, we need someone who can hit the ground running and be flexible with hours." "I can do both," I insisted, my voice probably sounding more desperate than confident. "I'm a fast learner, and I really need this opportunity." Something in my plea must have struck a chord because she looked at me more closely. "Tell me about your economics background," she said, leaning forward. "What was your focus in college?" For the next 20 minutes, we dove into a discussion about market trends, investment strategies, and financial planning models. I was shocked by how much I remembered. My brain might have been on standby for a decade, but the information was all still there. "I'll give you a trial run," Diane said finally. 3 days a week to start. You'll help customers with basic accounts and loan paperwork. $17 an hour. If it works out, we can talk about something more. $17 an hour felt like winning the Powerball. It was a world away from Julian's 7-figure income, but it was mine. Walking back to my car, I called Chloe's school to check on the visitation rules. "Mr. Croft has enrolled them at Northgate Academy," the secretary said coolly. Of course he had. A private school, a 40-minute drive from my house, where he could control every single interaction I had with my own kids. That evening, I sat in my mom's old rocking chair on the porch, running the numbers over and over. Even with the bank job, it would take months, maybe years, to prove financial stability. The legal fees alone to fight for custody would wipe out my meager savings. Julian knew exactly what he was doing. He was trapping me. As twilight settled over the fields, I noticed something odd. The porch light cast a shadow on a section of siding that looked different from the rest. It was newer, though it had been weathered to blend in. I made a mental note to check it out in the morning. Old houses had their quirks, and I was too drained to go on a treasure hunt. For now, I had to focus on the immediate future. Tomorrow, I would start my new job. I would take the first step toward getting my children back. It wasn't a grand plan, but it was a start. And I had no idea that my mother's house was about to give me the tools I needed for the fight ahead. My first day at Crestwood Valley Bank was surprisingly okay. Diane put me right at the front desk, helping people open accounts and fill out loan applications. It felt surreal to be in my old business suit, acting like a competent professional when inside I was a complete mess. But then something amazing happened. A young couple came in, wanting to apply for their first home loan, and they were completely overwhelmed. As I walked them through the process, explaining debt-to-income ratios and amortization schedules, I felt a flicker of my old self. I was good at this. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed making complicated financial ideas simple for people. "Wow, you really know your stuff," the husband said when we were done. "We were so lost, but you made it all make sense." His simple compliment felt like a lifeline. For the first time in 10 years, someone valued my intellect, not my ability to plan a party or manage Julian's social calendar. Diane noticed. "You're a natural," she said to me during my break. "Ever thought about getting your financial advisor certification? We could really use someone who can handle investment planning." The idea planted a seed. Maybe this part-time job could be more than just a way to survive. After my shift, I stopped at the grocery store. The checkout girl, a teenager with bright purple hair, was surprisingly chatty. "You're Eleanor, right? Mrs. Croft's daughter?" When I nodded, she smiled. "She used to come in here all the time. She always bought the fancy dark chocolate and those business magazines. Said she was keeping up with the world for when you needed her help." That struck me as odd. My mother had been a school librarian, quiet and practical. She was more interested in classic literature than in stock market reports. Maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. When I got home, I decided to investigate that strange piece of siding. Armed with a flashlight and a newfound sense of purpose, I went out to the porch and examined it closely. The boards were definitely newer, but what was more interesting was that they seemed to be covering what looked like the outline of a small window. I found an old crowbar in the garden shed and started carefully prying at the edges. The wood splintered and gave way far more easily than I expected, revealing not a window, but a small hidden door. Behind it was a space I never knew existed, a secret compartment built into the wall between the porch and the living room. My hands were shaking as I shined the flashlight inside. There, on a dusty wooden shelf and wrapped in thick plastic, was a metal box about the size of a shoebox. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I pulled it out and carried it into the kitchen to get a better look. It was a small personal safe with a 4-digit combination lock. I tried my mother's birthday. Nothing. I tried my own birthday. Still nothing. I just stared at it, my mind racing. What could Mom have possibly hidden that was so important? On a whim, I tried the year she inherited the house from my grandmother. The lock didn't budge. Then, a faint memory surfaced. When I was a little girl, Mom used to say our family's lucky number was the day she and Dad were married. I had completely forgotten, but she'd always joked that all the best things in her life happened on the 18th of the month. With trembling fingers, I dialed in 618, June 18th, their wedding anniversary. The safe clicked open. Inside, the first thing I saw was an envelope with my name, Eleanor, written in my mother's neat, familiar cursive. Underneath it were stacks of official-looking documents and what looked like a few jewelry boxes, but the envelope was what I reached for first. It was thick, heavy, as if it held more than just a simple letter. I carefully tore it open and unfolded several pages of my mother's handwriting. The very first sentence made my whole body tremble. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means you found your way home, and you found what I've been keeping for you all these years. I had to stop and look around the quiet, dusty house. What had she been keeping? And how on earth did she know I would need it? Outside, the wind rustled through the coastal pines, and I had the strangest feeling that my entire understanding of my mother was about to change. Have you ever learned something about a family member that completely altered your perception of them? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. My hands were shaking as I kept reading my mother's letter under the dim light of her old table lamp. Eleanor, I need you to know something about our family that I never told you. Your father and I weren't just a librarian and a history teacher. Before you were born, we built something I have spent your entire life protecting for you. I put the letter down, my mind struggling to make sense of her words. My parents had always seemed so ordinary. Dad passed away when I was 16, and I'd always remembered him as a quiet high school teacher who loved books and fishing on the weekends. Your father was a genius with investments, the letter continued. He started with a small part of his teacher's salary, buying stocks in companies no one else was looking at. I helped him with the research, and together, we slowly built a portfolio that grew beyond anything we ever imagined. But we chose to live simply. We wanted you to value hard work and your own achievements, not grow up feeling entitled to money you hadn't earned yourself. The letter went on for 2 more pages, detailing how they had quietly hidden their wealth, living a modest life while their investments compounded. They had set up trusts and purchased properties through a holding company, carefully documenting every single transaction for the day I might need it. But why keep it a secret from me? We watched you fall for Julian, and we saw how he needed to control everything, including you. Your father wanted to say something, but I held him back. I hoped you would find your own strength. When you gave up your career for his ambitions, I knew I had to make a new plan. If something were to happen to us, and you ever found yourself alone and powerless, you would need resources he could never touch or even know existed. My mother had been playing a long game of chess while I was still learning to play checkers. She had seen right through Julian's charm more than a decade before I did, and she had prepared for the exact disaster I was now living. The woman I thought of as a simple small-town librarian had been a secret financial mastermind, building my escape route for years. I finally looked at the other contents of the safe. There were stock certificates, bond records, and account information for banks I had never even heard of. The numbers were staggering. Even after all these years, my mother had left me assets worth well over $1.5 million. But that wasn't all. Beneath the financial papers were several jewelry boxes. They held pieces I'd never seen her wear: diamond stud earrings, a classic pearl necklace, and a watch that looked incredibly expensive. And under all of that was an insurance policy with my name as the sole beneficiary. The payout amount made me gasp: $2.5 million. The very last thing in the safe was a small key attached to a business card for a bank in the next county over. In my mom's handwriting, it said, "Safety Deposit Box 421. The rest is in there." I spent the entire night going through every single document, trying to grasp the sheer scale of what my mother had done. She had been so methodical, so careful, so brilliant. Every investment was tracked, every transaction was recorded, and every tax return was filed perfectly. Around midnight, I just started laughing through my tears. The audacity of it all was overwhelming. While Julian was patting himself on the back for building his business empire, my supposedly simple mother had been quietly building a bigger one, and she did it all just to make sure I would never be trapped. But the most powerful part was at the very end of her letter. Mom had written, "I know you feel like your economics degree was a waste, but it wasn't. You have the knowledge to manage all of this, to grow it, and to build the life you truly deserve. Your father always said you had his head for numbers and my patience for the long game. It's time to prove him right." The next morning, I called Diane at the bank and requested a personal day. "I have to take care of some family business," I explained, which was the honest truth. Then I drove to the county trust bank with the key and my mother's identification papers. The safety deposit box held even more. There were additional stock certificates, deeds to properties I never knew we owned, and detailed instructions my mother had written for liquidating assets into working capital. She had even outlined 3 different business plans for me, depending on my personal comfort with risk. But the biggest shock came from the property deeds. My mother had owned 4 rental properties in the valley, a small office building in the middle of town, and the mineral rights to over 500 acres of land in the hills. The rental income alone would have provided a comfortable living. She had been quietly accumulating wealth for 30 years while everyone, including me, thought she was just a retired librarian living on a pension. As I sat there in the bank's sterile private room, surrounded by all this evidence of my mother's secret life, I felt a fundamental shift inside me. The helpless, defeated woman who had walked out of that courthouse just a week ago was gone. In her place was someone with resources, with knowledge, and for the first time in a very long time, with real power. Julian had no idea what was coming for him, and after everything he had put me through, I was going to enjoy every single moment of showing him exactly who Eleanor Croft really was. The change didn't happen in an instant, but it started the second I walked out of that bank. I spent the next 3 days poring over every document, every investment, every single piece of the financial puzzle my mother had left me. She hadn't just saved money, she had built a sophisticated portfolio that would impress any professional investor. My first move was to liquidate enough assets to secure my immediate financial stability. I contacted the investment firm that managed my mother's accounts and set up a meeting. The advisor, a man named Mr. Sterling, treated me with the kind of respect that comes with a substantial portfolio, a stark contrast to the condescension I'd grown used to as Julian's ex-wife. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman," Mr. Sterling said, looking over her investment history. "She had an intuitive grasp of market cycles that many of my professional clients lack. Some of these positions she chose 15 years ago are still outperforming the market today. Within a week, I had access to enough liquid cash to solve all my immediate problems. I paid off the small mortgage on the farmhouse, hired contractors to overhaul the ancient wiring and plumbing, and started making the house a real home. Most importantly, I opened new bank accounts that Julian's lawyers would never be able to find. But the money was just one piece of the puzzle. I had to reestablish my professional credentials in a way that would impress a family court judge. The part-time job at the bank was a start, but I knew I was capable of much more. I called my old boss from the financial planning firm where I'd worked before I married Julian. "Eleanor Croft," he said, clearly surprised to hear from me. "I heard you got married and left the city. How have you been?" I explained my situation, carefully leaving out the details of my inheritance. He was sympathetic. "The industry has changed a lot in 10 years, he admitted, "but you have a solid foundation. Have you thought about getting certified as a financial advisor? There's a real need for independent planners in those smaller towns." He pointed me toward an online certification program I could finish in 6 months. With my economics background and my mom's detailed records as my study guide, I felt a surge of confidence. This would show any judge that I was building a real career, not just getting by. But the children were always my main motivation. Julian allowed one supervised visit a week, monitored by a court-appointed observer who documented every word we exchanged. Chloe was confused and angry, struggling to understand why I couldn't just come home. Leo was quieter, more withdrawn, but he still crawled into my lap the second he saw me. "Daddy says you can't take care of us anymore," Chloe said during our 3rd visit, with the brutal honesty only a 9-year-old can deliver. "He says you don't have a job or a proper house." I chose my words carefully, knowing they would be reported back. "I have a house now, sweetie, the one where Grandma used to live, and I'm starting a new job, helping people with their finances. It's what I studied in college. Can we come see your house?" Leo asked, his eyes full of hope. But the court order was strict, neutral locations only. Julian's strategy was working, isolating me from my children while building his case that I was an unstable parent. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old college roommate, Kate, who was now a partner at a top law firm in the city. "Ellie," she exclaimed, "I was wondering what happened to you. You just vanished after graduation." I laid out the whole story, the divorce, the custody battle, and my plan to challenge Julian's narrative. Kate listened patiently, then asked a series of sharp, practical questions about my finances. "You have to be strategic," she said finally. "Courts don't like to change custody arrangements without a very good reason, but a significant improvement in your circumstances is one of them. Document everything: your income, your home renovations, your career progress. And whatever you do, don't let his lawyers know about your inheritance until we're ready to use it." Kate's advice was exactly what I needed to hear. I would rebuild my reputation, establish myself as a competent and stable mother, and only then would I reveal the full extent of my resources. Let Julian think he'd left me destitute while I quietly built an arsenal. And the best part? I was actually enjoying it. After years of managing Julian's life, using my own mind for complex analytical work felt like waking up from a deep sleep. I'd forgotten how much I loved it. 3 months later, I got an unexpected call from Diane at the bank. "You've really impressed some of our biggest account holders," she explained. They're asking for you by name when they need financial advice. Would you be interested in taking on a larger role? The promotion came with a significant raise and a flexible schedule that worked perfectly with my studies. It was exactly the kind of professional validation I needed for my custody case. But the real surprise came when I reviewed the returns on my own investment portfolio. Following my mother's strategies and applying my own analysis, I had grown the portfolio by 12% in just 3 months. I wasn't just managing money, I was actively building wealth. Julian had always told me I didn't have the mind for business, that I was too emotional for financial decisions. As I looked at the numbers proving him wrong, I realized something important. I wasn't just getting my life back. I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. And I was just getting started. 6 months after I found my mother's letter, I was a completely different woman. The scared, defeated person who had fled the courthouse was gone, replaced by someone who woke up every morning energized by the day ahead. I had nearly finished my certification program and was already taking on independent clients through the bank. In a small town, word travels fast, and my reputation as the financial advisor who actually listened grew quickly. I was booked weeks in advance, but the real turning point was when I bought the office building in town, the one my mother had secretly owned for years. Instead of just being a landlord, I decided to renovate the ground floor and open my own financial planning practice. The space had been a defunct insurance agency, but I could see its potential. It would be professional, welcoming, and entirely mine. The renovation project put me in contact with local contractors and business owners, people who saw me as an up-and-coming professional, not as Julian's cast-off ex-wife. I was building a reputation based on my own merits. "You're really doing it," Mrs. Gable said one afternoon, watching a crew install new windows in my office. "Your mother would be so proud. She always knew you had a fire in you." That comment made me pause. I had changed so much, but I still had a long way to go. The supervised visits with the children had become less formal. The court observer, a kind woman named Ms. Peterson, noted in her reports that both Chloe and Leo were happy and relaxed during our time together. Chloe started asking more questions about my new house and my job, and Leo started making plans for when Mommy has her own home again. Julian was clearly frustrated by my progress. Our brief handoffs during custody exchanges were tense. He had expected me to fall apart, and instead, I was thriving. His attempts to intimidate me no longer worked. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, Eleanor," he sneered after one failed attempt to get a rise out of me. "But this whole independent career woman act isn't fooling anyone important." His words revealed his own insecurity. He had built his identity on being my provider, my protector. Without a helpless woman to control, he seemed lost. A truly satisfying moment came at Chloe's school conference. Her teacher, Miss Davies, remarked on how much Chloe's mood and schoolwork had improved over the last few months. "She talks about you all the time," Miss Davies shared. "Your new job, your house. She's so proud that you help people with their money. Whatever you're doing, it's having a wonderful effect on her." That validation was everything. It was documented proof for my custody case. That night, I stood in my beautifully renovated kitchen, looking over my business plans. The house that once felt like a symbol of my failure now felt like home. My mother's furniture, which I'd initially seen as relics of the past, now felt like comforting links to her wisdom. I opened her letter again and read the last paragraph, which I'd practically memorized. "Eleanor, you have everything you need to build the life you deserve. The money is just a tool. Your real power comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone else define it. Trust yourself, trust your education, and trust that I knew exactly what I was doing. Looking at all I had built in just 6 months, I finally understood. The inheritance gave me the opportunity, but the transformation came from me. I had rediscovered the parts of myself I'd given up to please Julian. I wasn't just financially independent, I was intellectually and emotionally independent in a way I'd never been before. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer, Kate. Ready to file the custody modification petition? Your documentation is rock solid. I typed back a single word, yes. The fight ahead would be tough, but I was no longer the powerless woman from that first hearing. Julian had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated not just my will, but my actual ability. He would soon find out that the woman he dismissed had become someone formidable. As I got ready for bed in the house that was truly mine, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. It was about justice. My children deserved a mother who knew her own value, and they were finally going to get one. Tomorrow, I would make the call that would set everything in motion. The real battle was about to begin, but I had already won the war against my own self-doubt. The custody hearing was set for a Tuesday in November, almost exactly a year after Julian had torn my life apart in that same courthouse. This time, I walked through the doors in a tailored suit I had bought with my own money, carrying a briefcase filled with documents that told a very different story. Kate met me in the hall, looking sharp and confident. "Ready?" she asked, giving her notes one last glance. "Remember, stay calm. Your progress speaks for itself, but your composure is what will win this." Julian was sitting across the courtroom with his expensive legal team. He looked like the same successful businessman, but his smug confidence was gone. It was replaced by a tension I'd never seen in him before. The look of a man who knows the rules of the game have changed. Judge Albright, the same judge from a year ago, reviewed the new filings. "Mrs. Croft," he began, "I see you're requesting a custody modification based on a substantial change in circumstances. Please present your case." Kate stood and began to systematically lay out my transformation. She presented my employment history at the bank, my completed financial advisor certification, testimonials from my growing list of clients, and bank statements showing a stable and substantial income. She showed photos and inspection reports of my fully renovated home, complete with beautiful new bedrooms for Chloe and Leo. But the real bombshell came when Kate presented the statements from my investment portfolio. "Your Honor," she said, "Mrs. Croft has not only achieved financial stability, she has demonstrated exceptional financial skill. Her investment returns have consistently outperformed market averages, and she has established irrevocable trusts for both of her children's future education." Julian's lawyer, Arthur Vance, looked stunned. He clearly had no idea about the inheritance. He asked for a recess, and I watched him and Julian in the hallway, their hushed conversation growing more and more agitated. When they returned, Vance's strategy was one of pure desperation. "Your Honor, we question the origin of these alleged assets. At the time of the divorce, Mrs. Croft had no financial resources. Where did this money suddenly come from?" Kate was prepared. She presented my mother's death certificate and all the legal inheritance documents, proving every asset was legally transferred and reported. "Mrs. Croft inherited these assets from her late mother," Kate explained calmly. "Every transaction has been documented and verified. There is nothing suspicious about these funds." Vance tried another tactic. "Even if the assets are legitimate, sudden wealth doesn't make someone a good parent. Mr. Croft has provided stable, consistent care for over a year." That's when I asked for permission to speak. Judge Albright nodded. I stood, feeling a strange sense of calm. Your Honor, a year ago, I was a different person. I had allowed my marriage to define me, and I lost sight of my own abilities. As painful as it was, my divorce forced me to rediscover who I am. I looked directly at Julian. I'm not asking for custody because I have money. I'm asking because I have proven that I can build a stable, loving, and independent life for my children. I rebuilt my career, I established my own financial security, and I created a home where Chloe and Leo can truly thrive. Judge Albright asked me several pointed questions about my work schedule and childcare plans. I answered each one with confidence, drawing on months of hard work and genuine expertise. But the most powerful testimony came from Miss Peterson, the court-appointed supervisor. Over the past year, she testified, I have observed remarkable positive changes in both children when they are with their mother. Mrs. Croft is patient, stable, and deeply engaged with their emotional needs. The children are always happy and excited for their visits. Julian's team tried to discredit her, but her detailed notes and professional standing were unshakable. When Vance suggested my success was just a temporary fluke, Judge Albright cut him off. Counselor Mrs. Croft has provided overwhelming evidence of her career advancement, professional certifications, and substantial financial resources. Your client's custody is not permanent simply because it was the original arrangement. The hearing ended. As we left, Julian cornered me in the parking lot, his composure finally gone. I don't know how you did this, Eleanor, he seethed. But money doesn't make you a better mother. The kids were happy with me. You're just disrupting their lives for your own ego. I looked at the man who had once held absolute power over me and felt only a sense of pity. Julian, they are my children too. And unlike you, I'm not trying to keep them from their other parent. I am trying to give them a mother who knows her own worth. What do you think happens next? Does Eleanor get her kids back? Or does Julian have another trick up his sleeve? Share your predictions in the comments. The 2-week wait felt like an eternity. The call from Judge Albright's clerk finally came on a Friday afternoon. Mrs. Croft, the judge has reached a decision. He would like to see you in his chambers on Monday morning at 9. That weekend was the longest of my life. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, rearranged the kids' rooms for the 3rd time, and went over every possible outcome with Kate. He wouldn't call you in just to say no, she reassured me. Denials usually come in the mail. A face-to-face meeting means he wants to discuss the terms. Monday morning brought the first snow of the season, blanketing the countryside in a layer of white that felt like a fresh start. I drove to the courthouse, my heart pounding with a hope I was almost too scared to feel. Judge Albright's chambers were less formal than the courtroom. Julian and his lawyer were already there, and Julian looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept all weekend. I have reviewed all the evidence, Judge Albright began, and I am prepared to modify the custody arrangement. Mrs. Croft, you have demonstrated remarkable personal and professional growth. Your financial stability, career development, and housing situation clearly meet the court standards for primary custody. The words hit me with a wave of pure relief. I had done it. I was getting my children back. But the judge wasn't finished. However, to minimize disruption, I am implementing a gradual transition. For the next month, the children will spend weekends with you. After that, assuming the transition is smooth, they will live with you during the week and spend alternate weekends with their father. Julian's lawyer immediately objected, but Judge Albright was firm. Mr. Vance, your client's original argument was that Mrs. Croft was financially incapable of caring for her children. She has more than overcome that challenge. The children deserve a meaningful relationship with both parents. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a mix of triumph and nerves. I had won, but now the real work began. How would the kids adjust? How would I balance my growing business with being a full-time mom? The first weekend was better than I could have imagined. Chloe spent the afternoon excitedly decorating her new room, while Leo, though quieter, seemed genuinely happy just to be there. "Mommy, are we going to live here forever now?" Chloe asked as I tucked her in that night. Her voice was a mixture of hope and fear. "This is our home now, sweetie," I promised. "And we're going to live here for a very, very long time." But I knew Julian wouldn't give up that easily. A few days later, Diane from the bank called me into her office. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you about something," she said, looking uncomfortable. "I got a call from someone claiming to be a private investigator, asking questions about your salary, your clients, and whether the bank knew about significant unreported income." The harassment was starting. He couldn't challenge the custody ruling directly, so he was trying to ruin my professional reputation. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "Nothing, of course," she said. "But you should know they've also been contacting some of your clients. The tactic was petty, but it could be effective. If Julian could damage my business, he might be able to create grounds for another custody challenge." I immediately called Kate. "This is actually good," she said surprisingly. "If we can prove he's behind this, we can file for sanctions. Desperate people make mistakes, but proving it would be hard." That night, as I reviewed my client files, I remembered something from my mother's letter about building alliances and protecting yourself through your community. I had been so focused on my own success, I had overlooked the power of my network. The next morning, I called a meeting with Diane, my accountant Robert, and 2 other local business owners I had become friendly with. I explained the situation honestly. "This is unacceptable," said Maria, who owned the town's biggest real estate agency. "We've all seen how hard you've worked. An attack on you is an attack on our whole business community." What came out of that meeting was an informal shield. They would all refer anyone asking suspicious questions directly to me and Kate. More importantly, they would actively promote my services to their own clients, creating a firewall of support. "You're not alone in this, Ellie," Diane assured me. "We're not going to let some bully tear down what you've built." For the first time since Julian's campaign started, I felt truly safe. But I also started planning a move of my own. If he wanted to play games with my reputation, I was about to remind him that I knew exactly where all his secrets were hidden. The scared woman he'd divorced was gone. In her place was someone with resources, allies, and a very clear understanding of how the world really worked. Julian's harassment campaign continued, but it backfired. Instead of hurting my business, his clumsy attempts at sabotage were actually generating support for me throughout the community. The final straw came when one of my elderly clients, Mrs. Finch, called me in tears. "Eleanor, dear, a man came to my house pretending to be from the IRS. He said you were under investigation and that I had to give him all my financial records related to your services." Impersonating a federal agent was a serious crime, one that even Julian's lawyers couldn't explain away. I immediately called Kate, who filed a complaint with the state attorney general. "He's getting sloppy," she said with a grim satisfaction. "Desperation makes people careless." But while the legal system moved slowly, I decided on a more direct approach. I knew enough about Julian's business from our 10 years together to know where his weak points were. His construction company had become successful through a series of ethically questionable deals with city planning officials. I had organized enough of those charity dinners to know which officials had benefited from Julian's generosity. I scheduled a private meeting with my accountant, Robert. I need you to look at something, I said, showing him copies of our old tax returns. Do any of these charitable donations seem odd to you? Robert examined the documents. These contributions to the Municipal Progress Fund are very interesting, he said. It's not a registered charity. It appears to be a political action committee with very few public reporting requirements. A little more digging revealed that Julian's charity was essentially a slush fund used to finance the campaigns of local officials who then awarded his company lucrative contracts. It wasn't strictly illegal, but it was the kind of arrangement that would be deeply embarrassing if it ever came to light. I made copies of everything and scheduled a meeting with Julian at a neutral coffee shop. He arrived looking confident, probably assuming I was there to beg him to stop. "Eleanor, I'm glad you called," he began. "I think we need to discuss the custody situation. The children are confused, and I'm worried about the influence your sudden wealth is having on them." I just smiled and opened my briefcase. "Actually, Julian, I wanted to talk about something else. I was looking over our old tax returns, and I found some interesting patterns in your charitable giving." His expression shifted from smugness to confusion as I laid out the photocopies of donation records, PAC reports, and a timeline of subsequent contract awards. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what I had and what it meant. "Those donations aren't illegal," he said, his voice tight. "No," I agreed, "but I imagine the local newspaper would find them very interesting, especially when paired with a timeline of who approved your company's contracts. Your friends on the city council might have some explaining to do." He just stared at me, the full implication of my words sinking in. His business, his political connections, his entire reputation, it was all built on a foundation that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want you to stop harassing my clients. I want you to stop trying to undermine my business, and I want you to accept that our custody arrangement is final. Do that, and these documents remain private." The silence was deafening. He was finally seeing that the powerless woman he'd cast aside was now capable of destroying everything he had built. "You've changed, Eleanor," he said, a strange mix of resentment and respect in his voice. "Yes, I have," I said. "I've learned to protect what matters to me." He stood up to leave, then paused. "You know, I liked you better when you were weak." "I know you did, Julian," I said softly. "That was always the problem." After he left, I sat there for a long time, processing what had just happened. I had not only stopped his harassment, but I had proven to myself that I could stand up to the man who once controlled my entire world. The children's transition to living with me full-time went beautifully. Emma threw herself into decorating her room and making new friends, while Leo slowly came out of his shell, joining the school soccer team and chattering about his day with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. The real proof of our new stability came one night when Leo had a nightmare. He called for me, not his father. I found him sitting up in bed, tears on his cheeks. "I dreamed that Daddy took us away again, and we couldn't find you," he whispered as I held him. The fear in his voice broke my heart, but it also showed me that he finally felt safe. "That's not going to happen, sweetie," I promised. "This is our home now. Nobody is ever taking you away from me again." I realized then that winning custody was just the start. The real victory was creating a home where my children felt secure enough to be vulnerable. My business continued to grow beyond my wildest dreams. I now had a small team helping me manage the workload. The office building my mother had left me was now a bustling hub, housing not just my practice, but also a legal aid clinic that served our community. But with success came new decisions. Large financial firms from the city started making acquisition offers. The attention was flattering, but it also felt like a test. "You've built something special here," said Isabel Croft, a representative from a regional firm. "Your client retention rates are off the charts. We'd love to bring you under our umbrella." The offer was life-changing, but it felt wrong, like surrendering the control I had fought so hard to win. I called Mr. Sterling, my mother's old advisor. "Eleanor, these offers are a compliment," he said, "but the real question is whether selling aligns with your long-term values." I spent the weekend thinking about what I truly wanted. I already had financial security. What I valued most was my independence, the ability to make decisions that were right for my clients and my family, not for a corporate board. On Monday, I politely declined the offer. "I appreciate it," I told Ms. Croft, "but I've built something that serves my community, and I'm not ready to give that up." Her response surprised me. "I respect that. But if you're ever interested in consulting for our Rural Development Division, please let us know. You've figured out something a lot of big firms are struggling with." That conversation made me realize I was no longer just a local advisor. I was becoming a leader in my field. But the best recognition came from Emma's teacher, Miss Davies. "Emma talks about you with such pride," she told me at a parent-teacher conference. "She tells everyone her mom owns her own business and helps people with their money." Hearing that my career was a source of pride for my daughter, not a detriment to our relationship, was the ultimate validation. Julian's old narrative that a good mother couldn't also have a career was a lie. That night at dinner, Emma asked me about college. "Mom, when I go to college, will you help me plan my finances like you do for your clients?" The question showed me I had broken a cycle. My daughter would grow up assuming she could have a career and a family because she was watching me do it every day. I sat on the porch that night in my mother's old rocking chair and reread the letter that started it all. Her words about trusting my education and knowing my worth had been a prophecy. But the deepest truth was one I had learned myself. Real security doesn't come from money. It comes from knowing you can create value, solve problems, and build a life based on your own strength. I opened my laptop and started writing an article, a piece about how my personal transformation had led to professional innovation. I realized my story wasn't really about divorce or money. It was about discovering that the woman Julian had dismissed as worthless had always possessed the power to build something incredible. My mother had seen it. Mrs. Gable had seen it. Even Diane at the bank had seen a flicker of it. The only person who hadn't seen it was me. But sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're truly capable of building. As I finished writing, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Losing the life I thought I wanted had led me to the life I was always meant to live. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity. Remember, you have more power than you think. Sometimes you just need the right circumstances to prove it.